Alright, so we're going to break down some more of the shell scripting here. And then you're going to go over your grep and your sed and regular expressions. And eventually I'll go over awk too, but not today. You have enough on your plate. But what I am going to go over is some ways of debugging scripts, and I'm also going to go over post and pre operations and some other things of that nature. So let's talk about doing post and pre type operations for execution. Now what this means here is, say I'm running a loop, and it could be a for loop, although probably not, but I could do a for loop if I wanted to. And what I could do is actually increment or decrement some value. Now of course I'm going to do a declare. Well, I declare I here for an integer, right? So we're going to do something like count. I'm going to set it at 0 here, something of that nature. And so basically I'm declaring a brand new variable, and of course I'm going to give it no spaces here as far as that goes. And then I got a couple of choices here of what I could do. And I could say, for instance, count plus plus like this, and I could say echo count here with a $sign, and I'm going to put in quotes count value. Alright, and so it's going to give me a new line each time. Now, depending on how this works or how this is done, depends on what happens. Now, let's see, can't do anything real fancy with this scripting language like I can in C++, so I'm not going to get into that at the moment. There's also a printf statement. If I use printf, I could probably make it do something fancier. But that was gedit, yeah. It's a gedit program. I got to it by going to activities here and then typing in gedit. Yeah, you're going to need it, yeah. Gedit in the terminal. You just type in terminal to get to the terminal. Yeah. And we're going to cd into scripts. I'm going to say ls right here. And I'm just going to look for that 4 I was just talking about here. Whichever one that was. I got several scripts up here now. Was it for fruit? It might be for fruit. For fruit or not the fruit, right? It's probably for fruit. Yeah, it is for fruit. All right. So okay. Command not found. Why does it not like me? Say that should work. Oh. Okay. Alright. So Jiminy Christmas. Alright. Declare I here should be declaring an integer. Count. It looks like I can also get away with just doing this, and it'll automatically set it up as an integer 2 for me, which is nice. And that works right there. So now count is an integer. I should be able to do plus plus and have it display it, but it's not going to do it as you might think. So they have a nice example here. So if I just say at this point echo right here, and then I say count, for instance, like this, and I put a $sign in front of it, it's going to, or should, display what the count value is. And then what I need to do here for this whole process here, I can eliminate this extra line, which is great because I want to, so that way I can show some extra capabilities here. And one of the abilities I want to show off with this whole fun thing, if I put double parentheses around it inside like so, and I should be able to plus plus this inside of here. Alright, and see what this does. If it doesn't like me, it's okay. What I'll do is 2 different echo statements. So sorry, we'll see real quick. This language is real picky, so it gets like real interesting on some of the syntax sometimes on this thing. Alright, there we go. Yeah. So it starts out with 0 and then it starts counting up. Now this is really interesting because depending on how it increments depends on how it works here for the post or pre. If you want, what I can show you, this works fine. Apples, oranges, pears, bananas. Alright, so let's look at this output real quick here. Alright, it says we have apples 0 count value, orange juice is 1 count value, pears is 2 count value, and bananas is 3 count value. Okay, that means how we're going through our loop. And depending on how we're accessing these values is determined on a post or pre addition. So what does this mean? Well, if I do a plus plus operation here after the fact, this is a post incrementer. Instead of saying, and let me explain what this plus plus is, right? So the plus plus is equivalent to saying count equals count plus 1. That's what it means, okay? So here we're taking whatever value is in count and adding 1 to it and assigning that to count. So essentially, let's describe this. If count had a value of 0, all right, then that'd be 0 here plus 1. What's 0 plus 1? 1. Yeah, it's no trick question. It's straight up. All right. So it's 1, and then 1's going to get stored into the count variable. Does that make sense? That is identical to saying count plus plus. Does that make sense? Now there's a couple ways we can write this though. We can write count plus plus and post, or we can do a pre here where I can say plus plus count. You're probably going, well, what's the difference? The difference is how it's evaluated. In a post, it's going to actually look at the value inside a count before the addition operation is actually performed. So, meaning that if I told it to display, and we got this result, so yeah, I can prove this, right? So if I tell it to display count, it's going to display the current value in count and then increment it inside of the echo. So literally what happened, echo, this had a value of 0 for our count because we didn't have this other code here a second ago when we ran it, right? So when we ran it, that other code I just highlighted wasn't there. So what happens here is that since it wasn't incremented, the plus plus, when it was being evaluated, aka when echo statement was printing it, okay, it comes out 0 because that was the current value inside of it. Then after it displayed this message here for this echo statement, it incremented it to 1 because it incremented it by 1, added 1 to it. Does that make sense? So in a post, it's going to do the evaluation of what the value is inside that variable first, and then it's going to do its add operation for a post incrementer. Does that make sense to everybody? So what happens if I do a pre instead, the plus plus count instead of count plus plus, right? Because count plus plus is your post, and plus plus count is your pre. Oh gosh, you're getting confusing. No, post just means that, hey, it comes after, right? Just like a post-apocalypse. I can't talk. Post-apocalypse, whatever, that whole thing. I swear I do this all the time. Always makes me sound really intelligent. And then if I do a plus plus here before the count, this is a pre. You know, the example I just thought I wasn't appropriate. Let's see here. Let's think of another one for pre. Pre-game. There we go. That's a good one. So you would do stuff before the game, right? Whereas post-game, where people go home driving drunk. So, you know, you got two different scenarios there. All right, so your pre-game, you're probably drinking, so you're not drunk yet, right? Or having a party, or calling people over, or whatever, having food, barbecue, etc. It's a lot of fun. All right, so and here we have our two different operations. So same thing here with the variable, though. So if I say right here, you can't have both, you can only have one or the other, right? Can't do that. It's gonna go, what are you doing? No, you gotta do something like that right there. And then let me go ahead and just pound these out. Alright, so I'm gonna show you again, echo, right? So this is a pre-execution now, instead of a post. Oh, look at that. Check that out. Totally different result. What happened? Well, this is a pre. This means it added the value before it was evaluated. Right here. So count started out with a value of 0, right? But then we said plus plus count. So it added 1 to count before it displayed it with the echo statement, before it was evaluated. Does that make sense to everybody? That's the difference between the two. You might be going, why does that matter? You have a question or no? Okay. Yeah, both plus plus pre and post is still count equals count plus 1. Either way, it's still count equals count plus 1. However, it's just how, if it's evaluated before or after the addition in an expression. Does that make sense? Okay, not that making any sense at all. All right, so can it what? Yes, we have 2 different results here. Check it out. Apples 1, 2, 3, 4. Apples 0, 1, 2, 3. As far as the evaluation of what's being presented, yes, it can. It does matter. It's still adding 1 in either case, but depends on when it's evaluated. This one here, okay, let's try to explain this. This one here is doing it post, alright? So it displayed the value inside a count before it added the 1 to it. So it started out with a value of 0. And so when we go to display this, it displayed a value of 0. Then we added 1. So when the next time we go show it, we show what's the current value in here. 1. When we done with the loop, the actual value of count is 4. But we only displayed 3. Why? Because after it evaluated it, then it did the addition. So therefore count ended up being 4 in the very last loop iteration. But we never said echo to display its final value, so we never saw it. Does that make sense?
So basically, when you're doing a post, it's giving you the same value as it would if you didn't do the count plus plus.
It gives you the same value as if you didn't do the count plus plus when you're evaluating it.
But
Yes.
the total number is less than what it would. I mean, it's greater than what it would be if you didn't do plus plus.
Well, yeah, so you are going to still increment it 1 after you're done evaluating. And so that's what matters here. And it can matter, like if you're, depending on how you're like accessing an array, you're going through a loop and accessing all the elements in the array or something of that nature, and you're looping through it. Depending on whether or not you're using post or pre, depending on whatever code you're doing for whatever logic situation, you could end up going beyond the length of that array. If you do, it's going to crash for your script. Your script's going to crash. You're going to get an error because you're going to go outside the bounds of the array. So essentially, you're going to try to access variables that don't exist. Is what's going to happen, and so that's a real problem. Okay, so having these incrementers is actually quite useful. We could use this for a lot of things, for that matter. Is this making sense more? If I wanted to, I could sit there and use this incrementer. You know how we have like $1, $2, blah blah blah. Well, I could probably make it increment through those different arguments using, plus plus operator going through a loop, processing each one after another. So things like that. It's just interesting, really crazy things. It's very, very powerful. And then here we see we did our plus plus here. This is the pre, right? So what happened with the pre? Well, with the pre here, it started out with a value of 0. And it said, okay, we're going to have plus plus count here, right? So value of 0 was inside a count. We added 1, and then we evaluated it. So it came out 1. Then we went to the next one. And it said, okay, plus plus count again because we're in a loop, right? It's going to keep coming back over here and doing this over and over again. See? Check it out. We're looping through these different values: apples, oranges, pears, and bananas. And we're looping through those, and each time we're incrementing our count by doing plus plus, and we're doing this as a pre, so it's going to add 1 to it before it's displayed. Is this making sense? Yeah? Okay, cool. This is not easy to understand at first. It is a subtle thing, but it's actually an important thing. And it's very powerful, believe it or not. They have some good examples in your book here on page 1037. And if you look at that, we'll also get into a decrement or two. Yeah. Okay. I did enter it on line 9 here for fruit and apples, oranges, pears, bananas, and this is essentially a list of values. They're getting stored into a temporary array, and essentially it's going through that temporary array and storing each value in the for loop through each loop iteration. So meaning apples is going to be the first item on the list that gets stored inside of fruit. And then oranges is going to be the next item in the array or list here that gets stored inside of the variable fruit. And then pears and then bananas. So we can only loop 4 times because there's only 4 elements, or shall we say, well, yeah, 4 elements inside that temporary array, which is apples, oranges, pears. That's 4 different values. And these are the values that go into those elements. So essentially, this is like an accessory variable to access this temporary array in this loop here, which is cool. You can also do this with files too. You can say for star in some directory or something of that nature, and you can basically go through and loop through all the files. We actually did an example of that last week on that, so it's really cool. And so here I'm just displaying fruit here. And I put fruit here with a dash in here in order to make it not do the carriage return on this, and so it displays the fruit value here, which is apples for the first one, right? So it displays apples, and then it continues on to display whatever is displayed in this one. So that's why it says apples 1, and then count value afterwards, because we did the pre addition here for the count here. So we did a plus plus count operator here, and then once it's incremented to 1 from 0, right, then it's going to display it, and it gets in here for the count value. So if you look at this, what happened here, see, we get apples, right, for that first loop iteration, right? And when we first start out, of course, count has a value of 0. So 0 plus 1 gives us 1. Then it displays 1 afterwards with the echo there, and it also displays count value as part of that echo statement. Making sense? And we loop again, and so now it's going to grab oranges from that loop, right? Because that was 4 in, etc. I clicked, it just didn't take. What's that? Yeah, dash in. Yeah, it makes it not do a new line carriage return feed. Yeah. New line feed carriage return. Yeah. Yes, echo means to display. This is the simplest way to display something. There's another function called printf. I haven't even talked about it, but lets you do fancier stuff with your displaying of your values, and it's something closer to what, well, printf comes from C, Objective-C programming language, and so they took printf from there as a programming command, which a lot of the programmers are familiar with on Linux, because Linux is basically coded in Objective-C. Is what the language is used for coding. The entire kernel is written in that. A lot of the applications in Linux are written in Objective-C, and it's quite common. That and C++ would be your next most common one. So C# is basically Java. That's been renamed by Microsoft so that they could make some more money. So essentially C# is Java, basically. They just changed names of things slightly. whatever, and it's basically what it is. So, but Java and C# aren't used as much in Linux. I mean, there's mono, so you can execute C# programs with mono, but again, it's not common. It's not like a real common thing, if that makes sense. But anyways, so the next line there is going to be oranges, of course, because we're going through the loop, right? And then it increments it, right? So the value was 1 beforehand. You can see that, right? And then 1 plus 1 is 2. So then it displays the 2 after we add them together, and then it says count value again, of course. And then we go to the next one, and the next one in that loop list was pairs, right? So pairs goes into $fruit, of course. And then we have 2 plus 1 is 3, and then it displays the count, the plus plus count here, displays it. And then we get count value that gets displayed along with it. All right. Yeah. Yeah. It'll loop again if I run this again. Bam. Because we established it at 0 each time. We started off at 0 when we start our program, so that's why it's not continuing to increment. Otherwise, yes, it would continue to increment, like you were saying. But our variables are already known to us, and it's assigned a value of 0. This is called, oh, gee, Christmas, I should know this. Well, not should, I do know this. That's the frustrating part. We're initializing our value. Is what it's called. It's called initializing a variable. And this is where we are assigning a value of 0 typically. Not always, but typically 0 to a variable. So that way we give it a starting value. I'm giving a starting value of 0. So every time this program runs, count starts at 0. And then we increment from there. Essentially, I'm having it count the loop iterations for me and then displaying it. Yeah. Zero. Starts at 0. The 0 above apples is the actual count. If you need, I echoed it right here. See? So I displayed it, and that's why it's displaying 0. If you want, what I can Oh, he's talking about when I had it in post. Yeah. If I switch it around, I can switch around. I have to edit my code to do that, but I swapped it from plus plus beforehand, from pre to post, and from post to pre, etc. Yeah, I just swapped it around. Check it out. If I run it now, see, so 0 count value here, just to help nail that home. This is what it's starting out with. And then again, even though we are adding plus 1 to it, we're not actually incrementing it at the evaluation time. We are actually displaying it before we add to it, so that's why it's 0 again. So you're like going, well, why is it 0 again when we're adding 1 to it? That's because we did post, because it's actually going to display the value inside of it before we actually add 1 to it, because we did count plus plus. Now if we do a pre here, we do a plus plus count, it's going to increment it like it did here, right? So it went from 0 here to 1 because it took 0 and said plus 1 to it, and then because it was a plus plus count when I did that one, right? And then it displayed the value, which was now 1 for inside a count. Does that make sense, everybody? And that's the difference between pre and post. Now, not only can we add, we can also subtract. So we can do what's called a decrementer. It's called an incrementer when you do a plus plus, and it's called a decrementer when you subtract from it. And we can do a pre and post decrementer. So let's have a look at it. And I'll give you some other examples with some mathematics here in a bit. They're really interesting because literally how you use this can actually make a difference in your actual math too. So you're asking for when it's evaluating. Now, when it evaluates can totally be different between if it's just being displayed, like, it could actually be a part of a mathematical operation, and it gets evaluated when you do a mathematical operation also. And so it will actually affect the mathematics, and I'll prove that to you here in just a bit. So, yes, you'll need to know the terminal quite well as a Linux administrator. You need to know DOS quite well as a Windows network admin too. So you're pretty much going to be typing no matter what. But depending on how much you know, depends on how much you can automate your workflow. I've been showing my students in the other class. We actually are scripting like most of our servers, and we run our script, and it goes in and sets up the server, installs everything, blah blah blah, in a matter of seconds. So like you can take like a 2-hour workflow, type thing you would have to normally do, and you can script up that whole workflow, right? And you write it up as a script and then run it, and then you're done in a matter of seconds or minutes. No kidding. Yeah, they call them batch files inside of Windows. That's what they are. They're DOS command files. Yeah, yeah. That's where you type in the commands. Yeah, that's DOS. Yeah, DOS is like a poor man's version of Linux shell. Literally, it's based off a Unix shell. That's what DOS is. So it's a poor man's Unix shell. Linux is Unix shell. It's identical. It is the same thing, 100%. So this is Unix shell. Yep. Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and then you can also remote in. They don't have as many good remote in tools on Windows as they do on Linux, so you don't have security on the Windows like you do on Linux. If you're, huh? Oh, I'm sorry, you're like at home and you don't want to drive into work. You can type into your computer at work. But the problem is you're going through Telnet or something like that, and it's not secure. So then someone can pick up the daggone administrator's password and username and all that stuff, and then break into the system, because then they get Telnet in too if they have a sniffer on it. Whereas on Linux we have secure shell, and it encrypts everything that goes back and forth. So if you remote in on Linux, there's no problem. There's no dangers. But if you remote in on Windows, there's some dangers. There's some stuff you have to worry about. And Linux has got better tools for network administration. It's got better tools. It really does. They just get kind of nerdy with it, but you don't have to do everything command line like this. Actually, you can do all your Linux network administration graphically if you wanted to. It's totally possible to do it that way. It's just that a lot of the tests and a lot of the job interviews have you do it command line because they want people to be able to work remote. So that way they can put you in one office here, and then you're like fixing the server over in Japan or something like that while you're over in the office here in Georgia or whatever. I kid you not. So, I mean, they're like, they could have you do the network administration for many locations all over the world for their company, not just where you're at physically at on Linux. So they'll typically hit you up on terminal for that because it takes a lot less bandwidth and resources and computing power if you do it through command line. They're probably doing VNC if that's what you're talking about, virtual network computing. You can do that in Linux too. Yeah, it was actually designed to work with Linux first, then Windows. Yeah, they're using VNC. That's VNC. Yeah, they may call it something different. They may have a fancy name for the program or something like that. They're trying to hide the fact that it's VNC and that you can get it for free. You can get Tiger VNC, for instance, download it for free and run it. It came out of a university. It was a free download from when it first originally came out. It's just other people have gotten a hold of it, took the free code, revamped it, and then sell it. It's the same program. Yeah, sure, but you know what it is? It's VNC, and it's a free program. Just look up Tiger VNC. No kidding, it's free. Works on Windows and Linux. You don't have to go spend hundreds of dollars for it. It's free. Has been free since the beginning. It was first released. So, yeah. I got a video on how to do VNC if anyone's interested. How to set it up and how to work it and all this stuff. It's actually kind of cool. Yeah, on Linux. Yeah, but it's the same process on Windows too. Yeah, but it's on Linux. Um, okay, so we got over the plus plus increment. Let's go over to decrementer now. All right, so here we have minus minus here, right? So we're doing a post decrementer. So can anybody guess what's going to happen? It is going to go backwards. I agree on that. And it's going to subtract it by 1, correct? Can anybody tell me what the output's going to be before I even run this? It's going to start with 3 and go down. Anyone else? Yeah, it'd be negative. You're correct. 0, 1, 2. All right. Well, since we're doing this post, I'm going to make my prediction. It's going to start out 0, right? And then the next one, Apple's count 0 count value is going to be again, because this is a post and not a pre minus minus decrementer. And then I expect this to be -1. Oranges equals oranges -1 count value, and I expect this to be pears -2 count value, and I expect that to be bananas -3 count value. That's what I expect. It's not incrementing, it's decrementing. We did count minus minus. It's doing it by ones. It's subtracting 1 by 1. I'm saying this would be 0 on the first one. It's a post, right? So this one's also post, meaning it's going to subtract from it after it's evaluated. But we don't have a 1. It starts at value 0. Mm-hmm. Yep. All right, hold on a second. I'll explain that. I get where you're going now. Hold on. Of course, my prediction's right. Probably because I've been programming forever. All right, so let's see what happened here. In this case, we were doing a post incrementer. So each time we went through the loop, it was adding 1. So it started out with a value of 0. All right, so we added 1, 2, 3, etc. This one is a post decrementer. So we start with a value of 0. And what's 1 minus 0? 1 minus 0 would be 1. He's right. I'm sorry. What's 0 minus 1? I'm sorry. You're so right. -1. He's spot on, man. That's awesome. All right. Yeah, I'm being an idiot. Yeah, it would be 0 minus 1 because your count would be the value inside of it. So it's going to be the value of count minus whatever it is. So it would be, 0 minus 1 would be the correct way to say that. My mistake. But this is post, right? So the first time it evaluates what's the value inside a count, which is 0 because it's post, right? And then it decrements it. So it says 0 minus 1, you get -1. So we come to our oranges and we display what's the value inside of our count minus minus. And of course, it's going to evaluate what's inside of count. In this case, it's -1, right? And then it's going to do its negative operation from it. So you have -1 minus 1. What do you get with that? -2. That's right. So we come down to our next loop here, and it's going to evaluate count minus minus. And it's going to find the value inside of count, which is -2. Then it's going to decrement it. So -2 minus 1 is -3. So we get down to our last loop iteration, and it displays the value inside of count because it's the count minus minus here, and we get -3. Then it decrements it. One more time, and that'd be -3 minus 1. You get -4. But of course that doesn't get displayed because it's a post and we didn't do any more echoes. Make sense? Cool. So that's what's going on. Now what if I put what did it just do? Minus minus count. Yes, that's what we're going to do now. So we're going to do a pre. So let's see what happens when we do a pre on this. Anybody want to make predictions this time? No? -1 for apples. Oh, wow, I agree. I totally concur. Yeah, it is. It's just like the other one. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So this is a pre-value, so you're just going to do the same thing as the incrementer, only it's going to go negative because it's a decrementer. Exactly. So start with the value of 0 for our count value. All right. And then we have apples here, -1, count value, and then oranges -2, count value. Why? Because we get here to count, and we have 0 minus 1 is -1. I'll make sure I said it right that time. And so we have apples -1 before it gets evaluated, right? So it becomes a -1 there. And then we get to oranges here, and it's what? -1 minus 1, right? And then it becomes -2, and then that gets evaluated as -2. And then we have -2 minus 1, we get -3, and then that gets evaluated and displays the -3. And then we have -3 minus 1 and get -4, and it displays the -4 because we're doing this as a pre. Now, I promised that I would show you that this actually matters besides just displaying things. This actually can matter with mathematics and things of that nature. And so you have to be aware of what can happen. So, what if I do something like that? And you're probably going, no, what's going on here? Yes, but I need to space this out because I don't want it right up against it. I could, possibly, I don't know. This thing's real tricky about that kind of stuff. But, alright, so what would happen here? Now, I want to show you this because this actually it gets quite interesting, really, when you start using mathematics with this stuff. Now, if I run this again, alright, check it out. It's kind of what you expect. -1 times 4, you get -4, right? Because I did this as a pre for each one. See the values. Now let's swap that from a pre to a post and see what happens. Same thing, kind of. Right. But let's look at it this way. I want to show you why this matters, even more so. So yeah, you saw different values there. What if I was doing this as a sum, whatever, where I was actually, computing this, right? So what if I took wherever this value is in here and said sum equals here and say $sign. Oh, dude, I'm just gonna copy and paste. Why bother, right? So what if I did something like this instead, without the double $signs? Let's only have a $1 here, right? And what if I just replace this with $count? All right. Sorry. All right. So what if I change that around real quick there for that expression? Let's see if my idea works. That's a whole nother ball game, right? Find out if I even thought through this or not properly. We'll find out real quick though. And apparently, no, I did not think through this correctly. While looking for a matching closing tick, syntax error expected on line 23 and 13. So that's the wonderful thing about this. It actually gives you debugging information. So 13, it didn't like it. And then so it didn't like it because I didn't put in quotes, which is kind of funny. Let me see if I can't get rid of that $sign there. Hold up 1 second here. This language drives me nuts a little bit because it is so picky on its syntax. Okay, it didn't like that one either. Well, I can put it inside of quotes with it. Value here. I just can't imagine it needing to be that way. Anyhow, let's not do that, please. This should be a type mismatch though for a value because it should be evaluating. Yeah, that's what I was expecting it to do. Let's say it can't take quotes because that's an integer. Some can only take integers. It can't take text. Okay. Oh gosh, never mind. I missed it. I missed the fact that I didn't have a second. Daggone it. I didn't have the second set of quotes there ending it. Of course, it didn't tell me that. Sorry, I missed that. All right. So you'll notice that our sum value here is negative 12. Here, because that's what the end of our loop is. And this would be a totally different result than if I did my minus minus as a pre for my final result for my sum, right? Because it's running through the loop. So this is where, it might sound like a subtle thing, but you can actually end up with big results. Now check this out. I got two totally different values for my final value here inside of sum versus that of this here. And of course, I would probably need to add the previous sum to the current sum. So technically, you wouldn't just do it like this. You'd also add a sum to it. So instead of that would be like another parentheses, probably. Yay, happy day. Um, maybe. I don't know. I'm not really tempted to find out, to be honest. But I need to access this value inside of here, so I'd have to put a $sign there like that. Alright. Aha, that's right. So if I ran pre there, I get a minus 40, and then if I do this in post, probably everybody's like, Jiminy Christmas, you're changing a lot of stuff without explaining. Hold on, I will explain all. Sounds like a tarot card reader. Alright, so I'm going to come up here. Only probably more factual on my end. Alright, so this is post here, right? And so we get a totally different value here for our sum by doing a pre versus a post. Oh my gosh, it makes a big difference. Is it starting to make sense? Starting to hit home a little bit? Yeah, big difference there. A matter of negative 16. Why? Because the last value was negative 16. It never got added to it. So since the negative 16 never got added to it because it was in post, right? Because it added it after the fact. So on the loop iteration, it never actually got added to the sum. So if you're doing this as a tabulation where you need to add up some kind of value or whatever to figure out something, you could end up with a completely erroneous answer because you didn't do pre or post correctly when you were doing your additions for your mathematics. Does that make sense? So the evaluation isn't just, hey, we're evaluating to display. It could also be a mathematical operation. And then here's an example of we're not evaluating it through the echo at all. Matter of fact, if we look at the echo here, right, we're just displaying the value inside a count. It's not even part of the evaluation process, right? We're just displaying the value. Here's where all the evaluation process is happening. So here I'm saying sum is equal to the value stored inside of count minus minus in a post, right? So it's going to essentially, let me break this down for you, it's going to take whatever the value of count is and multiply that times 4. Then it's going to decrement it by 1. Then it's going to take that value and add it to whatever value was inside of sum and assign it all to sum. Does that make sense? So how does this happen? What happens now, right? Well, if we're starting out here and this is a post, right, our count starts at 0 and our sum starts at 0. So let's plug some values in and actually compute this in our heads. Some people are shaking their head. They don't want to do that. Well, we're going to do it anyways. So we're going to take 0 here, right? Count is equal to 0. And we're going to multiply that times 4. So what's 0 times 4? 0. Yeah. And then we're going to subtract 1 from 0. Negative 1. And then we're going to add whatever is inside the sum, which is 0 right here. Yeah. So 0 plus negative 1 gives you negative 1. Bada bing. Making sense? Yep. And then to make matters worse, let's go to the next loop iteration. All right, going to the next loop iteration. What's count have in it now? We just said a second ago. -1. Yeah, thank you. All right, so we have -1 in here. We're going to take -1. We're going to multiply it times 4. We're going to have -4. Right, good. And then we're going to add whatever value was inside the sum. What was the value inside the sum? No, it's not 0. We said it was -1, right? Because we took the value inside sum earlier and said -1. So we now have -5 getting stored into sum. Does that make sense? Next loop iteration. Next loop iteration, count is now what value? No, count's going to be -2 because we also decremented it. Remember? Decrement it. So -2. Did I forget to decrement? I'm sorry, that's not -5. That'd be -6, right? Because you'd be adding -1 and then decrementing it by 1, and then that would be on top of the -4. Sorry, that's -6. Sorry, into sum. I'm not thinking. Yeah, it gets complicated, right? So we have -1 here. Let me break that down again. Sorry. We had a -1 from before inside count, right? And -1 times 4 gives you -4. Then we decrement it, which makes it -5, because we're saying -4 minus 1 makes it -5, right? And then inside of sum was -1. So -1 plus -5 gives you -6. -6 gets stored inside of sum. Awesome. And some of you guys going, there's no way I believe this. Don't worry. We can actually prove this whole entire equation if you like. It's not a problem. Each time, all I have to do to prove this. So here, this way I don't have to worry about anybody going, you're making this up. This is always helpful. All right, so now you can see each step of the sum getting computed here through each loop iteration. So this just makes things a little more clear. Okay. And wouldn't it be cool if I actually put that on its own? Oh boy, I did, didn't I? Let me swap that around because that's messing with this whole beautiful echo breakdown that we have here. And let's take that sum here. Let's take that bad boy. Throw it up there. There we go. Save. Sorry. My apologies. There it goes. Now it displays it nicer and prettier manner. All right. So just like I said before, check it out. It's -4 here from earlier. And then sum here was -12 on the next iteration, which is totally different than what I said. Awesome. Let's see here. Where did the math break down?
-2 plus -4.
This is a post, though. Oh, yeah, it would be -2 here.
Yeah, -2 plus -4 would be -6 times that by.
No, it's -2 after this calculation, though, and not before. Yeah, it's treating it like it's a pre instead of like it's a post, which I don't get. Well, let's do it as a pre real quick. My brain is feeling like a post. Alright. If I do this pre, I'm going to get a totally different value, of course. Or should, anyways. I do. Alright, so yeah, that adds to my confusion like crazy. Oh, wow. Yeah, it's giving me something completely different than it should. Okay. Oh, that's part of the fun, I guess. It's not doing the evaluation like it should for this. Typically it does. They're trying to show an example of it in the book here for doing that, and fun thing is it actually does do it in the book. So I'm not real sure why it's not doing it for me for the addition there. That's really interesting. If you look at your book, is it just because I have a space? I swear this language is so fickle. Like if you are the slightest thing off on any little thing, it makes it not work. Okay. Well, it's a pre, not a post. So I would expect that actually. Well, I know what's happening. I'm just surprised at what's happening. So it's basically not evaluating it like it should. Essentially, what it's doing here on the second iteration here, say count is negative 1 in here, it's actually making it negative 2 before it's multiplying it times 4, which makes it negative 8. And then previously it had a net minus 4 in there, so that makes it negative 12, and it assigns the negative 12 to sum. And that's what's going on. But it shouldn't be doing that since this is a post. In post, it should be saying negative 1 times 4, get negative 4, minus 1, etc. As far as that goes, if I'm not mistaken. Because sum here is the negative 4 in there. But so I shouldn't be seeing the value I'm seeing, but I am. It's just frustrating. So, and it did it here too, where we're seeing it also here, where it should be 0 times 4. Instead, it's becoming negative 1 times 4. It's actually evaluating this before it's supposed to. Now, the funny thing in your book, it doesn't do this. It does what it's supposed to do. What's your question?
You've got, I don't know if it was mapping at all, but you have sum equals dollar sign and you've got big parentheses count.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, never mind. I see what I was doing.
Yeah, because I didn't want to get confused, because you have to get into order of operations otherwise, where multiply is above your addition, and addition and subtraction are the same level, but multiply and divide are at the same level if you're doing order of operations without parentheses. I always use parentheses because it clearly defines what the order of operations are for a mathematical expression, so it makes things go a lot better and a lot easier. So that's weird, but if you look at your book on 1037, check it out. They have minus minus m plus 3. And you'll notice that m was set to 10, right? And so they echo out 10. So in this case, since this is a pre, 10 becomes 9, and then adds the 3, it makes it 12. And then that's why it gets echoed out, 12. Does that make sense? And then the next line says echo n, and it says 9, because the value inside of n is still 9, but the what's displayed is 3. If that makes sense. The 3 didn't get added to n, it just got evaluated for the echo to get displayed, because it was never assigned to anything. That's why I was having to assign it right here. Otherwise, it would just vaporize or disappear upon the echo command. Does that make sense to everybody? And then they did a different one here where they do m plus plus minus 3, and you end up with 6, right? Because the n is not evaluated first. So they say, basically, they're saying 9 minus 3. 9 minus 3 is 6. That's what gets displayed. And then n is incremented up to 10, because 9 plus 1 is 10. And so that's what you see at the bottom of the page. Does that make sense? Because that was a post incrementer. So that's why that matters. So it works fine for the echo apparently, but not properly for the actual mathematical operations, which is really weird. But whatever. It's frustrating. And the rest of the stuff they get into on page 1037 and 1036. And that gets into things like unary minus, unary plus operators, things like negation with do an exclamation mark, or curly tilde here, which is a bitwise negation complement. I'm not going to get into that. Double star, single star here means multiply, but if I do 2 stars, it would mean exponential. So this would make it go to the 4th power if I did that right there. All right, so that makes it go to the 4th power, for instance. Single star means multiply. This means divide. And then modulus here, which is a percent sign, always is. That is the modulus, or aka a remainder. It's another way to say it in mathematics. If you did long division from back in the day from 3rd grade, you remember doing all that? Probably don't remember how to do it, but if you remembered it, doing it, remember there was a remainder at the end if there was anything left over, if it wasn't properly evenly divided, something so much into it. You can do that also in the computer. You just do a percent sign in there instead of like a divide, and it gives you the remainder. Make sense? That's what modulus is, aka remainder, percent sign. Subtraction, we already went over. Single one of those, yeah, like that. That'd be subtract. Add would be a single one of that, like that. That'd be adding. Bitwise shift, which is greater than, less than, like that. So bitwise shift. Whether you're shifting it left or right, this shifts it left, this shifts it right. I'm not getting into that. That is really complicated. That's where we're actually moving bits around at 0s and 1s in the computer. So like for instance, we can do an integer variable if it's a long int and actually move them around. That's actually what your IP address for IPv4 is stored as a 32-bit integer. It's a long unsigned int for it. And then you can actually bit shift it in order to get to different parts of that address and pull it out as different octets within inside of that, because it's made of 4 octets, because it's 4 different bytes of information. Each byte actually contains one of your IP address numbers. So like for instance 192.168.0.1 would be each byte. So 192 would be 1 byte, 168 would be another byte, 0 would be another byte, and 1 would be another byte, as part of that whole unsigned long integer made of 4 bytes. I'm not getting into how to... What's that? Yes, it's 8 bits per octet. Octet means 8 bits. That's what octet means. Octagon, etc., etc. It means 8-sided polygon, etc. Octal means 8. So yeah, it's an 8-bit, which is a byte. Right? So you get 8-bit chunks there for each part. And so it's 32-bit overall for the unsigned long unsigned int, and that's what makes up your IPv4 address. So yes, using this you could extract that stuff. I'm not getting into how to convert that stuff and how to do all that. I actually have made a video on how to do that. I have to actually do it where I'm coding my own server inside C++, inside of Linux. I'm not getting into that with SDL. But that's one example of how you can use that. I think that's way above and beyond this class, and so I'm not touching that with a 10-foot pole. But basically, there's an example of it. Less than or equal to, you can use this with your if statements, or your for loop, or your while loop. Actually more your while loop, not so much your for loop. But you can use something like this here. This means greater than or equal to. And then less than, greater than, etc. If you're doing an equality test, you can do a double equals. If you're going to say this is not equal, you do an exclamation mark and then equal. This again has to do with like if condition statements. You can use bitwise and operator. We're not doing this ever. That right there is it. Again, that's 1 and zeros manipulation stuff. I'm not getting into that. That is way beyond this class. Right here is a bitwise XOR. XOR means exclusive or this one, but not both. Does that make sense? That's what exclusive or. That's a bitwise or operation. I'm not getting into that. We got a vertical bar here, which is a bitwise or, which could be this one, or both. That would be a bitwise or. I'm not getting into that either, though. Double and like this would be something like you'd use in your if condition statement. It says this and this have to both be true in order for a if condition statement to be true. Make sense? Otherwise, everything else is false. And then double vertical bars like this is not the bitwise one. It says this one, or both. And if you're doing, you do this inside of if right here. So these two you would use right here. Ternary operation, I'm really not going to use that or get into that, but that'd be this right here. It is a throwback from freaking C++, where if you want to be real nerdy, you can use this instead of an if statement in order to do a test condition. It's a shorthand version of it. That's being real nerdy. You could also just write an if condition statement, which is like 99.999% of programmers do. This is extremely rare, and this is only if someone does this in order to show off that they actually know that, because no one uses it pretty much. That's why it's so frustrating when someone uses it. And then all the operations I just said here with the equals for the bitwise shifting and stuff like that can be done with an equal sign, so you can add it in. So for instance, you could do something like that and bitwise shift it that way. But again, we're not getting into that. I'm not touching that with a 10-foot pole. All right, so there we go for that breakdown. And that's how that works. There was one other thing I was wanting to show. And this is pretty cool. And probably could have been useful a second ago. But what I can do is something like this. And then alright. No, I got something else going on. How awesome. What happened? What did I do? Oh, sorry. I forgot to put that back in after I was doing the examples. Alright. So pretty cool. This lets you get debugging information. By doing the set space dash x there, it lets you break down your script line by line and see what's going on. So when I run this, it literally displays each execution of the code as it runs. So count equals 0, sum equals 0, echo here, count, which is 0 count value, gets displayed in string. And then it has a count value, 0 count value gets displayed. Then it goes for fruit in apples, oranges, pears, bananas. Sum equals 0, it says. Echo, here sum equals 0. Sum equals 0. And then it says echo in apples. So apples plus echo minus 1 count value. And so it's actually breaking this down and it displays -1 count value here next. And then it goes through the loop again. So you can literally trace through your actual loops this way. See this? Our sum is now -4, displays it, and then displays the values with it for a count and whatnot. And then it goes through the next loop iteration. Very cool there. It breaks it down. Sum equals -12, echo sum equals 12, -12, and then so on and so forth. So it actually breaks it all down. If you ever get trouble going, I don't know what's happening in my script when it's running, just use the set space dash x option, and it'll actually let you see what's happening inside your script as it runs, which is really cool and it's extremely useful. Yeah, set space dash x. And you do it at the beginning of your program, like I did here. And that made it go into debug mode. The moment I don't want to see it in debug mode anymore, that's simple. I just commented it out. Make sense? And so that can be extremely useful if you're ever writing a script and you're like going, I don't know what's going on. That right there will tell you what's going on. There's also some other ones. Dash X displays all the commands and their arguments as they are executed. This option is often referred to as the shell tracing option. Dash V is going to display all lines that are red. So for instance, if I did dash V instead, right here, you can see the results of it. It displays all the lines that are red. So this is all the lines that it reads in from the shell script as it executes them out, displays them. What I can do is I can also switch it up to another option besides -v. There's also one called -n. This one will read all the commands, but it doesn't execute them. I'm not sure right off the top of my head what you would use that for, but there, for instance, it read the script, but it didn't do anything. Again, I don't know why you would use that, but hey, if you need to, here it is. But -x is the most common one because it lets you run it in debug mode. All right, real quick, I want to show you a few more things. If I want to disable the shell tracing, I use +x. So I can make it trace just for a certain distance, and then I can turn it off. So let me show you what I mean. For instance, I could have it do the tracing only on the loop here and not on the rest of it. Say I don't want to see the rest of this stuff. I only want to see it for that for loop and nothing else, right? Well, I can do that. I can say set here -x like this, and I turn debugging only on, so this turns on your debugging here, and then I turn it back off right here. And you can see that we don't see all those other values that we were getting before. Now we only see the stuff with the for loop and nothing else. So just like what we set options in there for it, which is great. Let's see here. You can also use the syntax checker, where this will actually help you find your bugs, which is pretty cool. So, and I can do this when I run this thing. For instance, all right, so let me comment this out. And what I can do is when I run this, I use a -n option on this, and it runs syntax checker, which we've been pretty much getting anyways by default now. And if there's a bug on a certain line, it comes up and tells us, but it pretty much does that automatically, so the N option I think is just built in now, whereas back when you had to use the -n option. But if you ever don't get the debugging information and you want it, use the -n option. It's your shell command here, and you'll get it. Yeah, gives you syntax checking. So if you make a bug on one of your lines or something like that, it'll tell you what line the bug is on, where you made a mistake. It depends on what you're using it for. For echo, it does, where it doesn't show carriage, or it doesn't do a carriage return line feed. But for the sh command, it actually makes it do syntax checking. Sorry, so for sh here, it does syntax checking. So, it depends on what you're using your -n option with. In their case, they were showing off that if you did mv here, it will make it go into syntax checking with a debugging option. So that's pretty cool. Let's see here. You can also use this on command line too. If you ever try to figure out what's going on with your shells, you can actually use the -x option at the actual prompt to do it on your actual shell commands too. You don't have to just use it in scripts, by the way. You can actually troubleshoot your actual shell commands that you're typing out when you're at the command prompt, which can be useful. I'll show you. As a for instance, you can literally say set -x semicolon here like this, ls, and it literally will break it all out for the ls operation here. Script execution. Of course, for this usage, it's not that interesting, but if you're like piping one thing into another thing into another thing, it becomes more useful as far as that goes. Of course, I need to say set +x afterwards in order to turn it back off. Otherwise, it's going to do this on every command. now, so be aware of that. Otherwise, you're going to have a headache. So that's why quite often you'll do something like this right here, and then do another semicolon, and then do set plus X in order to turn it back off. So that way you ran it only for that one command, it turned it on, and then turned it back off after that command. Does that make sense? And I'm using the semicolons in order to run multiple lines or multiple commands on a single line. I can separate them by a semicolon. It lets me list multiple commands on one line. As soon as it's done running one command, it goes on, does the next command, and then goes on, does the next command for the semicolons. Make sense? Okay, good. Let's see here. Make sure there's nothing else in particular that's real important on this. And that was my main interest right there. I guess one last mention, I don't want to really talk about it, but I'll show you this real quick. I type in kill-L. This will list all the different signals that you can trap for signal trapping. And you can use signal trapping, you can trap them with a certain command that I never use. Use trap. You say trap like this, the name of the program, and then what signal it is you're going to trap. So quite literally, you know, you could do, gosh, complicated one. I really don't want to do a complicated one. They just did one. They just called it like, and here's an example. They did clean up, for instance. It's the name of a program. 2, then 15, like that. And then they're trapping those signals. And then you can look up what 2 and 15 is on here. So 2 is signal initialization here, and then 15 would be 15 would be off the, where is it? Terminal? Up to my left. Keep seeing 16. Oh, there it is. Yeah, signal terminal. So that would be the actual terminal that we're on currently. TTY1, for instance. But yeah, so there's an example. But again, this is probably stuff you're not going to use, like, hardly ever for the trap. Now, the debugging thing, yeah, you use that quite a bit with scripts, but the trapping stuff, there it is, but you'll probably never use it. Any questions? Too many to list? Alright, awesome. Everybody says there's not any, but I don't believe them. Alright, so with that, let's go ahead and just go ahead and play with this stuff. And then also, I just want you guys to have an increment and decrement understanding. I'm not going to make you code anything for that, but I do want you to watch the video as far as that goes. Just give me like one script with an increment and decrement. Let's do that, or whatever, from the video, and then that's it. So that way I make you watch the video. But you just do one increment or decrement. I don't care. It could be a post. It could be a pre. Just write your own little script with it, and that's fine by me. An example of it. That's all I need for that. And then do your grep video and do your sed video. So that's all we have. All right. So with that,